Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Is This the Life We Really Want by Roger Waters.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Now, before I even get into talking about anything that has to do with this album, I want to point out something that I didn't really mention, and that's the fact that we reached 200 subscribers. Actually, at this current moment, we're at 225 subscribers, so I'm kind of late by a quarter, but I want to thank you all so much. It kind of just, flew out of my head in some way, so thank you so much for that. And all of your support is really felt because the videos are getting a whole lot more views, and I know views isn't anything, but it just shows me how many of you are interested in the content that I make. And if a month ago my average view rating was about, let's say, 10, 11, maybe 15, now this month I usually get at least 40 views on each video, and I'm so grateful for all of you. So thank you very much. I love you all, and let's get right into my favorite bits from this album.
Mainly normally in southeast.
A happy new year to you. Follow me filming myself in the show, and I'll fall from a seat in the very front row.
There's hags, supermodels, actors, fags, bleeding hearts, football stars.
So despite not being the biggest fan of Roger Waters as the person he is, I was really anticipating listening to this album, and that's mostly because I intentionally put on this list the various solo albums by the members of Pink Floyd. And by some coincidence, we've been able to listen to 3.5 of Gilmour's solo albums and 1 solo album by Richard Wright, but as it happened, we didn't encounter a Roger Waters album up until now. Now, Roger Waters as a solo career artist is someone that I've been kind of avoiding for a while, let's say. So I loved Pink Floyd for a few years now, at least like 7 or 8 years I know Pink Floyd, but I kind of didn't really want to go and listen to his own solo discography, except for one album being his 1984 release, being The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. That specific album I actually really like. I've owned it on vinyl for a few years now and I really like listening to it, but today's album and this album have more than 30 years of a gap between them, so I was really interested to see how his sound developed in those 30 years. But firstly, let's point out the obvious. This album today, Is This the Life We Really Want, is a concept album. Now I'm pretty sure that Roger Waters never really made a non-conceptual album because he's such an opinionated person. Even with his last years with Pink Floyd, he released albums like Animals, The Wall, and The Final Cut, which were all pretty heavy concept albums. And the concept of today's album is basically pointing out all the misdoings of humanity, and that really echoes in the title of Is This the Life We Really Want? And I believe this concept to be Waters' most broad concept as of now, because, when he focused in the past, he focused on specific things. So he focused on hierarchy, he focused on war, he focused on, depression and fame, but this one just focuses on everything that humanity is basically doing wrong. And one thing that really surprised me about this album is just how untouched by time it is, and I mean by the way that the music is made. It feels like this was made by Roger Waters at his prime time. Well, come to think of it, if he still sounds like he's in his prime time, that means he never really left it. And despite some technical advances that came along the years, this album really sounds like something he could have produced even 30 years ago. But I guess he got even more opinionated in these 30 years, and that's really felt on this album. But his voice is very young, it's very crisp, he's very effervescent on this album, and I really quite like it, and there's honestly some moments on here that feel like they've been taken right out of The Wall or Animals. So if you're a fan of these two albums, you're probably gonna like this one as well for its music. The one thing I should point out about this album is its lack of progressive tendencies, and we've already started seeing this evolution of Waters' deprogressivization with albums like The Final Cut. And out of all the solo works by various Pink Floyd members, I would have to say that this one is the closest to contemporary music I've personally listened to. But I'll add and say that it doesn't mean that it has basic chord structures or basic patterns, it just doesn't really explore new grounds in their music and really stays put in one place. And despite Roger Waters and David Gilmour choosing to stay quite far from each other since disbanding from Pink Floyd, I can't help to see that now that I've listened to Roger Waters and David Gilmour, how similar their sounds in their solo albums sound. Like, it's really odd. I listened to David Gilmour and let's say like About Face has a lot of places where it literally sounds like Waters has written their songs, and at the same time we get an album like this that could have easily been sung by Gilmour and it would have sounded as if it's his own album. Now, I've mentioned at the beginning that I am not a huge fan of Roger Waters as a person, and that's mostly because he always criticizes my country and I don't find that fitting. And that's because he always criticizes the country that I live in quite harshly. And no, I don't live in the USA. But on a broader spectrum, what I find problematic with the message of this album is just how much it points fingers to each and every direction and it blames everyone, but it isn't really giving any solutions to those issues. And while I do agree with most of the messages found on this album, I believe that after a while it just sounds like he's starting to whine about all the things that's wrong in the world, and he never really does anything to say what could be done better. And that's pretty problematic considering the fact that this entire album is conceptually about all the misdoings of humanity, because honestly, as this album went along, it felt like there was just no hope, and it's quite depressing and very much unappealing to listen to at some point. And Roger Waters just goes out of his way to be as edgy as possible. He says the F word so many times throughout this album that it just sounds kind of cringy at the end. Now, there are some really good songs on here. I specifically really like the second track, the third track, and most especially my personal favorite, the fourth track called Picture This. Now, this one in particular, I think I kind of knew beforehand because it sounded kind of, you know, familiar in some way, so maybe it popped up in one of my shuffles at some point, but honestly it was pretty much a new listen to me, at least in its entirety, and it's a really cool song because I believe it has the best lyrics and melody combo in this entire album. So a song like the title track of Is This the Life We Really Want has some really strong lyrics on it, which I think are the best in this album, but the melody is quite forgettable. While a track like Broken Bones has some really lovely melodical ideas, it's very calm, it's very somber, and I really liked it, but the lyrics on it are honestly pretty cringy. And the last track on this album, called A Part of Me Died, is a really cool rock ballad which has a nice build up and a really nice climax that honestly could have lasted a bit longer. Don't quote me on what I just said. But yeah, whether you're a Pink Floyd fan or not, or whether you're a fan of Roger Waters or not, I feel like this album is sort of a must listen to anyone who likes prog because of its very strong concept. And you know, I really can't divide the love for prog from the love of concept albums, so if you like concept albums, this one is definitely one you should go ahead and listen to. This is a pretty cool cover. It makes use of the well-known art of text blackening. It's a really interesting way of taking one piece of written media and turning it into something new by blacking out certain pieces of the text and thus creating new meaning for the words. Now, I highly doubt that this is the way that they actually came up with the name for this album, or actually made this cover by just taking one piece of written media and then blacking it out. I think that this one is definitely more intentional, but I might be wrong. The one thing I do know about this cover and this album is that it was banned from publishing in Italy because the cover was claimed to be plagiarizing a work by the Italian artist Emilio Isgaro. Now, it's obvious that Isgaro didn't come up with the idea of blacking out text, but he does make a lot of his work revolve around this specific idea. And you know, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, how could this be plagiarism? Everyone's been doing it for a long time. But then I saw an article where the cover for this album was compared to another one of his works, and I'm just going to show you it on screen right now and you'll decide whether it's plagiarism or not. But honestly, in my personal opinion, I really like this cover and I think it has a really interesting meaning of erasing something to create something new, which in all honesty could be taken in two very opposite directions. This album honestly could have received an 8, but it is just too repetitive, especially towards the end, and the messages and the lack of real solutions to anything that's posed in this album is quite bugging me on a personal level, so it's gonna receive a very fine rating of 7 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Novella by Renaissance. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum, you are the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.